London, England. Well, if you're right here where this star is, well, pretty close. The star is Atlanta, Georgia. And you were to fly across the Atlantic Ocean over to London, it would be 4,200 miles. You could do this flight in about 7 hours, maybe 8, depending on the wind currents. I have done this flight multiple times. I usually land in Paris, right about here. And I have been to London a few times as well. But today, we're going to talk about what makes a nation. And going from our nation, the United States of America, to over to all these European nations. And you can see a key right here. This helps us. It's like a legend. It helps us figure out what's all over this map in case you can't read the labelings on it. Look, there's France and Switzerland and the Holy Roman Empire, which goes all the way down into Italy. There's Naples, which was owned by Spain at one time. This shows a time period during the 1600s. So that was like 400 years ago. Boy, all the people that were alive then are not alive now. But we are all descendants of these, possibly, in some way, shape, or form. They came before us.
My story, the Battle of the Spanish Armada. In this section, you'll read about Queen Elizabeth I of England and the defeat of the Great Spanish Armada. What does Elizabeth's story tell you about life in early modern Europe?
What does it tell you? The life of me, I can't figure out how to make the audio play and be able to read. But she just read this part. And we'll scroll down here and make it a little bit more visible for us all. So as she reads to us, we can say what she's talking about and even see that funny cartoonish looking thing of Queenie Elizabeth. Whoa! Oh, let me go ahead and read it for you. In 1588, Europe's greatest power, Spain, prepared to attack the smaller kingdom of England. The Spanish army gathered supplies and horses for an invasion. The Spanish soldiers were to travel to England on barges. At the same time, a fleet of 130 Spanish ships, the Armada, dun, 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 gathered to protect the barges. Oh, we must protect these barges. The Spanish Armada used massive galleons, huge ships that rode high in the water and were clumsy to maneuver. The English captains manned race ships. We're so fast. We are so fast. We are English and we are very fast. And the little race ships. These were smaller, faster, and much easier to handle. On the English shore, the troops gathered at Tilbury to hear their queen. This was a time when few women held power. But Queen Elizabeth had earned her people's respect. The English people also loved their queen. Hail to the queen! Long live the queen! At Tilbury, she knew that she had to prepare the troops to meet the Spanish, the best fighters of the day. I know I have the body, but of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart of a king, and of a king of England too, says Queen Elizabeth. Wow. Well, remember that our essential question today is what makes a nation? Is it a king, a queen, its people? What are the things that make a nation? We'll keep coming back to this question. Oh, look at this. This does not look good for this girl. In 1587, Elizabeth's advisors convinced her to order the death of her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scotland. They saw Mary, a Catholic, as a threat to Elizabeth, a Protestant. If you've ever heard of Bloody Mary, they're talking about her. They chopped her head off. Elizabeth and trusted court advisors planned the strategy for the battle with the Spanish Navy. I still can't get over the fact that they cut off her head. How far do we got to go down there? Wow, that's a lot of text. Guess what, guys? We got somebody to read it for us. I'm going to read this one. There we go.
Spain's attack against England happened in a time of religious conflict between Catholics and Protestants. Catholicism had been the main religion of Western Europe until the early 1500s. At that time, some Christians left the Roman Catholic Church and started their own Protestant churches. Spain's king, Philip II, was a very religious man who wanted to restore Catholicism to all of Europe. Elizabeth, who was a Protestant, urged Philip to let Protestants in the Netherlands practice their religion. At that time, the Netherlands was a Spanish possession.
Netherlands was owned by Spain. Real quick comprehension check here. Spain attacks England. Religious conflict between Catholics and Protestants. Okay, if you're Baptist, Methodist, Episcopal, anything like that, you're a Protestant. And Catholic is pretty much everything else. There are some major differences between these religions. But Catholicism had been the main religion in France, Spain, Italy, and to this day still is. But in England, there were a lot of Protestants. Some Christians left the Roman Catholic Church and started their own Protestant churches. So there's a separation of churches. And this caused a lot of problems because people believe in something, and when they believe in something, they stand up for it. You may know someone in your family that believes very deeply in their beliefs, and it drives their entire lives. So most wars in the world have been fought over religions. Let us continue.
Philip also believed that he should be King of England because he had been married to Mary I. Mary was Elizabeth's half-sister who ruled England before her death in 1558. Religious strife had shaken England ever since Henry VIII, father of Elizabeth and Mary, broke with the Catholic Church and started the Protestant Church of England. As queen, one of Protestant Elizabeth's earliest acts was to order a compromise with Catholics. Unlike Philip, she did not want to force people to share her religion. "I have no desire to make windows into men's souls," she said. Her wise actions prevented civil war in England, although tension remained throughout her reign.
Yeah, one of the big reasons that tension remained is because she killed her sister, and her sister was Catholic. I mean, what do you think? Well, of course there's going to be problems. You took somebody out that was in charge so you could rule. Tough gig being queen.
Spain and England were also rival empire builders. England wanted an empire and colonies like those of Spain. Those colonies had brought fabulous wealth, such as gold and silver, to Spain. English ships had attacked Spanish ships and taken their gold and silver. As the Spanish Armada set sail, the huge fleet appeared to be invincible or unbeatable. Yet the Spanish had several weaknesses. Besides sailing heavier ships, the Spanish captains had no maps of the coasts of Scotland or Ireland. The Spanish soldiers were brave fighters, but in the use of cannon, they lagged behind their rivals. In addition, food stores had been loaded too early and were rotting. Water barrels...
When they say that food stores had been loaded, they mean like stores of food. They would load the stuff in barrels and they had on the boat. You can imagine, they didn't have refrigerators back then. They didn't have freezable dinners. It just didn't exist. And they didn't have canning. So they'd put food in barrels and it'd go bad. And when your food goes bad, you can't stand on the water very long.
Leaked, and cannonballs were poorly made or the wrong size. In addition, there were discipline problems on board the Spanish ships.
So what she's really saying is that the Spanish Armada set sail. They were a huge fleet. They seemed invincible or unbeatable, but they had big ships. Their captains had no maps of where they were sailing. They were brave fighters, but they didn't have cannons. I mean, if you pull up next to a boat that's got cannons and you don't have cannons, you better get out of town. And on top of that, the other boats were faster. They were running out of food, they were losing their water, and their cannonballs were even the wrong size. Now, the Spanish were sure that they would win and saw the battle as a holy war, a war of religion. Philip even had the ship's sails painted with the cross of St. George, the symbol of the medieval crusaders. In spite of the seeming advantage of the Spanish, Elizabeth predicted this: "Let tyrants fear, we shall shortly have a famous victory over these enemies of my God, of my kingdom, and of my people." Whew, buddy, these things are getting heated up. Whoop, 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 whoop. Oh, somebody's kissing somebody's hand. The Spanish Navy helped make Spain a wealthy global empire. But the Spanish sailed old-fashioned, slower ships. Boo. Their loss to England changed sea warfare and the fortunes of Spain. Spain had ruled. And all of a sudden, England's taken over.
As the Spanish Armada neared the coast of England, the English fleet moved into position. For several days, the English managed to keep the Spanish ships at a distance. At midnight, the English sent fire ships loaded with explosives into the midst of the Spanish fleet. The Spanish commanders were forced to cut the ship's anchor cables and sail out to sea to avoid catching fire. The Spanish formation became disorganized, and the English took advantage of the confusion to attack at dawn. A decisive battle took place, and the losses to Spain far outweighed those of England. Spanish domination of the seas had ended. The English felt this victory proved that God was on their side. English admirals received a medal that said, "God blew and they were scattered." This victory at sea was one of the greatest triumphs of Elizabeth's reign.
Wow.
As the Spanish Armada...
Oh, we don't want to repeat that. Sorry. Hoo, 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 hoo. Yeah. Well, describe the major religions in Europe. Well, we talked about Protestant and Catholicism. We talked about England beating Spain. So, how do we answer the question, what makes a nation? Well, we're getting there. We are getting there. What makes a nation? New ways of thinking. Look at this. Locate on a map the Danube River, the Rhine River, the English Channel, and the Mediterranean Sea. I believe you can do this state standard. Explain how autocratic governments determine citizens' participation. We're working on that right now. Explain how autocratic governments determine citizen participation. Explain why international trade requires a system for currency exchange. Why do we need to have US dollars and Mexican dollars and Canadian dollars and the euro? Why do we have all these different types of money? Key terms: Renaissance, humanism, perspective, Reformation, Catholic Reformation. Well, we're going to take a little pause here in just a minute. We will record these words and we're going to give their definitions as we read through them. So the first one is Renaissance. If you don't have a piece of paper, press pause and then write down these words and give yourself about 3 lines in between each word. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different words. Press pause and write these down right now. Okay, so you've written down Renaissance, humanism, perspective, Reformation, and Catholic Reformation. Now, we will not take notes using the graphic organizer in your journal, but we will be using that later. Leon Battista Alberti drew on ancient models for his Renaissance church, Santa Maria Novella in Florence, Italy. I have been right here, and if I can find pictures of it, I'll bring them. I remember a bum standing right there holding his hand out. And if you ask me, I'll show you exactly how he looked. He held it literally to his palm to his cheek, as if he was begging for you to put money in his hand so that he could put food in his mouth. I put money in his hand. It was very depressing seeing him standing right there. The late Middle Ages brought many changes to Europe. Feudalism came to an end. Farmers began producing more agricultural goods, food, than they needed. Trade increased. They're trading their food and money with all kinds of countries. These changes led to a new age in European history called the Renaissance, or rebirth, born again, a time of renewed interest in art and learning. And I love art and learning. Let's talk about the Italian Renaissance. Okay, well, before we do that, let's write down our definition for Renaissance. What does Renaissance mean? It's rebirth, a time of renewed interest in art and learning. This is in the late Middle Ages. Go ahead and write down rebirth, a time of renewed interest in art and learning. I'm going to pause and let you write down the definition of Renaissance. Time of renewed interest in art and learning. You can see at this is just beautiful, all the art, and you can tell they're very detail oriented in designing these things. Renaissance, rebirth, a time of renewed interest in art and learning. Okay, now go ahead, and if you don't have it, just press pause and finish copying. Otherwise, we're going to move forward. The Italian Renaissance. Italy is a peninsula. That means it's surrounded by water. In southern Europe, Italy had been the center of the Roman Empire. The classical influence contributed to the Renaissance. Biggest part here is almost everybody loved the Roman Empire for their art and their contributions to sports, and they copied them. Trade grows and cities compete. Dun, dun, dun. Italian traders brought silks, like silk scarves and things like that, and spices back from Asia. They sold these in Italian cities such as Genoa, Venice, and Florence. These cities were major trade centers. In the markets, people exchanged coins of different lands. That's currency, folks. Merchants adopted a system to deposit money and write checks. These practices became the basis of today's modern banking. Unlike the kingdoms of other parts of Europe, Italy was divided into city-states. These city-states were often ruled by one powerful family. In addition to ruling families, cities were dominated by a wealthy merchant class. City-states fought often. They invented taxes on property and income and other ways to finance their wars. Trade grows and cities compete. What makes a great nation? What makes a nation? Well, one thing's for sure. What makes a nation is creating currency. Creating currency. Having some type of trade. Something to trade. Goods and money. We're going to take a pause here. We will re-begin this. You guys need a break. I do too.